I confess, quarantine slash this year officially got weird when I masturbated to an episode of National Geographic's National Parks. I was so turned on by nature, I had multiple orgasms. I confess, I am having some of the best sex of my life. It is while I am masturbating with someone on Skype who is living on the other side of the planet. I confess, I spent my COVID stimulus check on sex toys. Hang on, y'all. There we go. For 10 years, BedPost Confessions has gathered to hear anonymous confessions like these. No, those weren't my personal confessions. BedPost Confessions is what Thrillist calls the naughtiest things you can do in Austin. This is because people want a glimpse into people's sex life. We want to know your naughty, your heartbreak, the banal, the silly, the intimate, the changes, the words you use, the way you fuck up, and the way that you triumph. We want an unfiltered look into your bedroom. In 2010, after 10 years of living that New York City life, I moved to Austin. Within my first 2 weeks in Austin, I met up with an online friend that I knew via Twitter in real life. Sadie Smythe had a blog about her open marriage, and I had a podcast about my sexcapades, and we were both really active in the online sex positive community, which at that point was mostly Twitter and blogs. So after we eased our initial discomfort of meeting up with somebody that you don't know in person, and our conversation was flowing, I asked her, what is the Austin sex positive scene like? And when she said, there's not much going on here, we started talking ideas. Sex bloggers Rosie Q and Julie Gillis joined on, and 4 months later, BedPost Confessions was born. Our inaugural show was at Spider House Ballroom, featuring 4 BedPost founding members, myself, Sadie, Rosie, and Julie, and we all shared a personal sex story of ours. We didn't invite other storytellers for this first show because we couldn't ask somebody to do something that we hadn't done, which is get on stage and share something deeply personal to a room full of strangers. Also, we were setting a tone. We were beginning a conversation, and we were moving our individual work from online and into a collective public space. The United States has a complicated relationship with sex. We embrace it in the advertising sense, but not in the sense of the human condition. And so who better to bring the humanity into sex talk than 4 30 and 40-something-year-old mothers? We are the mothers you want to fuck, the friend whose shoulder you cry on, the priestess you whisper secrets to, using our white privilege to take risks and hold space. We put ourselves out there and we waited for a response. Did we always get it right? Hell no. Did we fuck up? Yes. Was there conflict? Sure was. And yet, BedPost Confessions is something that all founding members are deeply proud of. So, what concerns did we have about coming out of the shadows from operating semi-anonymously online into a public space? Would people show up? Would we get shut down? Would other storytellers actually take the stage? Could we maintain some sense of personal privacy? The answers were yes, no, and sometimes it was a struggle to book performers and to keep our own privacy. Our concern about having an audience, though, was eased after our first show. Quickly, we moved from the small stage at Spider House Ballroom into the large one, and when our monthly show was selling out regularly, we moved to a larger venue. In April 2012, our first show was held at the North Door. It was our 20th show and the beginning of the North Door becoming our home. We were developing a loyal community we were developing a loyal community that was engaging and offered feedback. We were building a strong performer base. We were honing our language on stage to tell people that we were creating an experience, and that experience may not be for you at this moment in time. So how did we develop the audience experience, and what was the criteria for a good show? You know, I mean, a show about sex, you might want to go to it because sex is titillating and taboo. But really, the stories featured at BedPost Confessions are about the complexities and complications of finding one's true sexual expression. Through a lens of vulnerability and humor, we strove for our storytellers to entertain the audience and also offer some education and a sense of ethics around sexuality. Consent is sexy. Noting the size of somebody's body or anatomy is not. A bit of broccoli in your brownies, we would joke. More formally, we would describe BedPost Confessions as a show that merged entertainment, ethics, and education. An audience member shared that as someone whose upbringing was repressed as fuck, and as a recovering rule follower, the opportunity to understand other people's experiences and views around sexuality gives me permission to fully understand and explore my own. You see, sex is really a blanket term that we use to mean so many different things. Sex can be the sex act, it can be orgasm, it can be connection, it can be intimacy, it can be tuning into your body, it can be numbing out of your body. Sex can be healing, sex can be destructive, sex can leave you feeling expansive and connected, and sex can also leave you feeling small and isolated. And so every third Thursday of the month, BedPost Confessions hosted storytellers offering various perspectives about sex and the myriad of ways it can be defined. With each show, we learned how to make the next show better. The show began to shift into what could sometimes feel like an open mic, though it wasn't, into a more polished and more well-rounded and thought-out storyteller roster. We pared down the number of performers allowed per show to 4, 2 storytellers, and then an intermission, and then the following 2 storytellers. We devised a formula by which we curated the show. This was about the speaker's credentials. Were they new to public speaking or new to public speaking, not new to public speaking? Wait, how did that go? Okay, it goes like this. New to public speaking, not new to public speaking, but new to storytelling, and maybe sex storytelling at that. We open up the show to include a storyteller whose trade is burlesque, aerial dance, music, magic, and even film. And pairing the visual stories with the written stories makes for a truly magical evening. And aside from the storyteller's credential and craft, we examined the tenor of each piece. We aimed for a roller coaster of emotion, with stories that were on the darker, heavier side, paired with stories that were on the sexy and erotic side, the relatable balanced with the unusual, the comedic anchored with heartwarming. Our storytellers were folks of questioned and questioning, out and outcast, curious and listless, and wanting to share their unique perspectives. Nestled between these storytellers, we read the anonymous confessions, written by audience members. The confessions were the most exciting part of the show because of the anonymity, but we all knew that someone in the room had written that confession. This is a titillating secret to reveal. The confession is an opportunity to begin a coy conversation with the person that you brought to the show, like, you know, I want to try that. Or maybe the confession offered up an opportunity to have an open and honest dialogue about something that needed to be improved upon in the relationship. The confessions are a way to gauge the city's sexual landscape, like this one. I confess I'm a lesbian and masturbate to fucking dudes. And I confess I have never masturbated once in my life, and I'm a 29-year-old man. We have heard confessions on people closeted about their gender and sex identities and trying to find a way to come out. We've heard confessions about the various household objects used as devices for sexual pleasure, confessions about cheating, threesome mishaps, threesome wins, oddest places people have had sex, sex regret, sex shame, release, sex therapy, paying for sex, being a sex worker, a sex scene snafus, oops, sorry, mom. And this one that summarizes so much about sex and humanity. I confess there is nothing sexier than someone owning their own shit. Emotional vulnerability is a huge turn on. Yes, indeed, it is. These handwritten missives we've collected at our in-person shows, and we now collect via an anonymous form online. We created this form at the beginning of COVID-19 lockdown as a way for people to, yes, still share the sexy and funny and intimate and embarrassing things that happen in our sex lives, but also for COVID confessions that speak to how intimacy and sex has changed during this global pandemic. And then we opened up the space to include how the Black Lives Matter movement is changing sex and intimacy. Through these confessions, we learned many people broke up with their racist partners and distanced themselves from toxic friends. Many shut down all dating and hookup apps and took to hibernating with sex toys, many of which broke, and while others cautionally started to get into new relationships. Hearing from our community through confessions that we post on social media has been our way to keep our community close. So the confessions, clearly, are an integral part of the BedPost Confessions show and community. Confessions were featured more and more prominently as our show grew. What we featured less of, women's bodies in our marketing. Here is a look at some of the BedPost Confessions posters over the years. Our first poster featured a cowgirl ready to mount because when in Texas, y'all. From there, we moved to a mouth near, a mouth like near getting it in with a mic, and then an illusion of a figure, and then a yonic flower, and then particles and condensation. And then you really see that like we have really shifted away from the tropes of sexualized women's bodies. And you know, that we built a name for ourselves and we didn't have to rely on this anymore is a good thing. And maybe we never even had to rely on these tropes, but we did it tongue in cheek or mouth and mic. Some other evolutions and milestones to touch on. In 2016, we developed Unspoken, a storytelling show about the harder things to talk about outside of sex. We ultimately closed this show, but we just merged the sentiment in with BedPost Confessions. In 2017, we moved to a quarterly model instead of a monthly model. And we kept this up, and for 2018, we added a show Wednesday, Thursday. 2019, we still stay quarterly and added a third show for a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday run. And we were on track for this setup for 2020. Our January 2020 sold out show, The Sweet Spot, was a hell of a way to kick off the year. I think it had our strongest curation of storytellers to date. And now this show, The Sweet Spot, holds an even sweeter spot in our hearts because, as Amy mentioned, the North Door has closed. This is a huge loss for our community. This is a huge loss for Austin. And while it was a thrill to have our first online show in September 2020, for now, we are pausing all production. Individually and collectively, we are experiencing loss and grief in a myriad of forms. The way we commune, the way we work, educate our kids, and hold each other accountable is changing. And so we are pausing and reflecting, and here tonight honoring 10 years of BedPost Confessions. We celebrate Andy Campbell, who began performing with us in 2011 and took part in our online show in September. His book, Queer X Design, 50 Years of Signs, Symbols, Banners, Logos, and Graphic Art of LGBTQ, is the first ever illustrated book to talk about the iconic designs, symbols, and graphic art representing 5 decades of queer pride. And his second book, Bound Together, Leather, Sex, Archives, and Contemporary Art, gets into all things hanky code, Thomas Finland drawings, and archival art histories, and today's queer identity is really built on. Andy is also the one and only performer to end a story by doing Zumba, which he has photographed there with his backup posse from his Zumba class. It was an incredible performance. We also want to celebrate Holly Lorca, whose recent memoir, Handsome Stories of an Awkward Girl, Boy, Human, Parade calls one of the 24 best memoirs to read in 2020. Holly has shared a lot of herself on the stage, 13 stories worth, in fact. And one of those stories was featured on Dan Savage's Hot Mic podcast. And we are thrilled to see Holly's hilarious and poignant work in book form. Also give a shout out to Ebony Stewart. Ebony Stewart is the author of Love Letters to Bald Fists and Home Girlhood. Her work has been featured in For Harriet, Afropunk, Teen Vogue, The Texas Observer. Ebony was the only poet to perform at the 2018 Seattle Pride Festival before 200,000 people. Ebony Stewart is hashtag Story of a Black Girl winning. I could highlight so many more accolades of BedPost Confessions performers, but I'll leave you with just a few other writers, comics, and nerd night performers that have graced the BedPost stage, including Nikki Devon, Adam Moore, Mariah Gossett, Amy Cavender, Danielle and Melissa Skidmore, Rachel Kramer Bustle, Julia Rossi, Selena Kosick, Brooke Van Poplin, Dana Rossi, Jay Bird, Wayne Allen Brenner, Adam Sultan, and Daniel Webb. Many of these storytellers are featured in our anthology, BedPost Confessions, Real Sex, Real People, Real Stories. Somewhere in these 35 stories, essays, and poems about cancer, fast food, celibacy, genderqueer identities, the vagina-mind-body connection, 19th century polyamory, coming out, motherhood, bondage, online dating, oral sex, fisting, aging, pegging, lesbian pulp fiction, dating violence, Catholicism, trans girlhood, sex work, and a lot of pee. You will find stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And speaking of extraordinary things, let's wrap it up with BedPost Confessions in numbers. Our in-person mothership show in Austin, Texas, brought together just over 1,000 people per show run. And we held our 100th show this past September for our online show. We have satellite shows in Ashland, Oregon, Atlanta, Georgia, Boulder, Colorado, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Edmonton, Canada, where Dr. Kim Tallbear developed TP Confessions about decolonizing Indigenous sexualities. We had 389 screens logged onto our first online show. Our podcast received 10,000 downloads a month. Our social media continues to grow, a lot in part to the Anonymous Confessions. You can find us posting them there. And so, in closing, I want to give thanks. Thank you to every person who has worked to make BedPost Confessions a rich and enlightening experience. There are a lot of you, and I thank you. I didn't talk about it too much, or really at all, and it's a bit remiss. We have fantastic American Sign Language interpreters, and I want to thank them for their contribution to the show, for making it more accessible to everyone. Thank you. Thank you to our audience, our community, for bearing witness and for changing the culture of shame-based sex. I am forever grateful and proud of what we have accomplished. In the words of Andy Campbell from our September online show, BedPost Confessions is destigmatizing sexual expression so that we can revel in the pleasure that we can give one another, one story at a time. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great talk. I really appreciate it. And everybody make a note of the fact that they have presences all over the place. I put URLs for some of their online presences into the event listing. So please feel free to go back into that if you haven't followed them on all the media yet. Now's your chance to fix that. Now, we opened up the channel for questions, and the first one that we got was kind of something to the effect of, what would need to happen for BedPost Confessions to come back as a show that people could attend?
Like in person?
I know, it's strange to think about.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I will say, like, we were going to have a November show, and we decided to cancel that. So maybe I could speak to that in particular. What to say about that? It's a lot of work, you know, and there's a lot of reinvention that we're having to do now. And I really loved doing our first online show. But this is not my full-time job. So there's just all these other myriad of things of trying to balance out. So I have a lot of things I want to do with BedPost. And I'll just say we're just pausing it right now. But if you are somebody who has skills that you want to offer to help take part in making the production happen, please get in touch. And we'll very much be having an online show. I mean, we will continue an in-person show once we can meet in person. We're just pausing the online version of BedPost.
Excellent. Yeah, it's challenging trying to do these virtual things when you don't get the feedback of being in a room with people. So it looks like that might be the only question that we had in the hopper. One other thing that I wanted to ask, though, in regards to the ASL interpreters, did you have any particular ASL interpretations that were particular favorites or that you always got a kick out of when you saw them? Specifically, well, like for any words or anything?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think the reason why I forgot to kind of mention, I didn't forget, first of all, there was so much to think about, including of 10 years, but I really see the ASL interpreters of providing a service. So to me, they're not really a part of the show in terms of the entertainment. So they are there doing a job. Now, I say that also because of the fact that, well, the first time someone comes to a show, they say, oh my God, the interpreters. And I said, yeah, they're great, but they're doing a job. They're not there to entertain the hearing audience. So I don't really pay attention to them, to be honest. What I can tell you, what I do pay deeply attention to is how much work that they do for the interpretation. They are so dedicated to making sure that they get the right tone, because there's not just the interpretation of the words, there's the interpretation of the entire tone and the mood. And especially when we're talking about sexuality and gender identity, that our English language is evolving. And so therefore ASL is evolving too. And we wanted to make sure that you're not just like translating a body part or even sex. Like that's what a lot of like the work that I do as a producer and as someone who edits the performers, that ask them like, well, what are you really meaning? ASL is like over here being like, yeah, what are you meaning when you're saying like sex or fucking? Because they want to be able to interpret it appropriately. So by having ASL like there to make sure that they're getting the right terminology, it also helps push the English language version of the story too, to define what someone is really getting at when they're talking about these words, essentially.
Outstanding. So we had another question come in while you were talking, which I think is a very excellent question. And it is, if someone wants to get involved and offer their services to the show, what is the best way to reach you to kind of start that conversation?
My email is miranda@bedpostconfessions.com. You can also just hit us up on Facebook or Instagram, slide into our DMs. Don't slide into our DMs with a confession though. We have a form for that. There's a lot of confessions that come through, and it's like, no, it's supposed to be anonymous. I don't want to know like who you are. Yeah, you can just email me, and yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Got one last question for you, and let's see if I can bring it into a easier expression here. So the question is, what's the next frontier of repression or oppressed activity / guilt therapy to target and learn about post-sexuality?
Whoa, wait a second.
Right.
Where are we going with this? What is the frontier of work that needs to be done?
I think they're asking like, what's the next kind of taboo topic that as a culture we need to work on if we get our sexuality straightened out?
Oh,
I'm not even sure where to begin on that. I have theories, but
there's still so much work to do with sex. I think aging is a big one, and aging in sex. There is a new sex toy that's coming out for the disabled community, and they present a lot of stats about the fact that we are all going to be disabled. Well, really, I said stats and then said all. That's not how that works. I don't know the stats. There are stats about how the majority of us will get to a point where using our hands will be difficult. And so a lot of sex toys require some dexterity. So the sex toy that's coming out on the market, it's called Handy, H-A-N-D-I, and it is designed for the disabled community, but also knowing that we will all probably lose some dexterity in our hands. So I think aging is still pretty, and accessibility are still pretty taboo, and I still want to put them in the intersection of sexuality.
Excellent. All right. I think that was just a spectacular talk, and you covered a lot of really great ground. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Miranda. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thanks for inviting me and for shepherding me through this process. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad to say that I can now have nerded out. You know, it's funny when you talked about like, oh, the thing that you corner somebody in a party to talk about. Oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. That I do corner people, like, and people to get on stage and tell their story. Yeah, when you put it in that lens, like, yes, totally want to nerd out on this topic all the time. So thank you for the opportunity.